Hi everyone, this is Andrew Primo, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, week 93 of Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this is the second week of December 2023. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about a little bit of politics and what is the current situation and what Ukraine is facing. Also, we're going to cover what Ukraine soldiers from the front lines are saying. So, everything is at stake for Russia now. Therefore, the stakes are high, and Moscow will do everything to win this war. Moscow sees Ukraine as a part of its territory without any rights to self determination, and definitely not part of European Union or NATO. For European Union, this will mean that it will be necessary to finally make serious political decisions from which Europe runs away like hell. The European Union doesn't want to punish those who undermine its foundation, which is what Hungary is doing today. Look at the level of cynicism reached by the Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. He accuses Ukraine of all sins, including corruption, lack of progress in judicial reform, and so on. Wait, what does the European Union says to Orban? As long as you, in your country, which you have been ruling since 2010, do not carry out any reforms, or the judicial system do not overcome corruption, you will not receive money. But he tells everyone in the European Union that Ukraine should not even think about joining the Union because it's corrupted, because, as he recently wrote somewhere, light, it's light years away from the European Union and so on. Therefore, we will probably have to endure. I have a rather pessimistic forecast here, but it seems to me that this will give our esteemed Western partners a reason to finally start thinking about changing the decision making procedure in the European Union. What they have today means only one thing: such a European Union will turn into a second UN, which will be a platform for political statements, but not a place where decisions necessary for member states will be made. So, most likely, the situation for Ukrainians will not be too positive for a certain period, unless there will be opportunities for technical solutions which will actually have the goal of starting negotiations, but only under a different banner. But this, so to speak, is another story. Russia now wants to set fire to more points on the map of the world in order to divert attention from Ukraine. It can be read even, as they say, without glasses. I don't rule out that something will start to catch fire in Moldova itself. On the one hand, Transnistria, on the other, Gagauzia. Gagauzia. The Russian influence is huge, all around the world. Why not? Venezuela is preparing to annex part of Guyana. And why not mention Africa, where Russia also has all the opportunities to destabilize the situation? For what? In order to divert the attention of the West from the main thing, Ukraine. But Ukraine is what is decisive for them. Because if Ukraine wins, then the Russian Empire ends once for all with Russia itself. So everything is at stake. This is this is an existential struggle, a struggle between the two worlds we have, totalitarianism and democracy. Therefore, the stakes are high, and Moscow will do everything to win. If a ceasefire agreement were reached tomorrow, Russia would receive a significant portion of Ukrainian territory, but less than it's expected. Moreover, in this form, it would be difficult to occupy it and defend it in the long term, and it would require significant funds for restoration and subsidization. Russia will not be able to prevent Ukraine from getting closer to NATO and the European Union. The assumption that Putin will willingly agree to ceasefire if only Zelensky can be persuaded to agree to it, but doesn't reflect the logic of Russia's strategic position. Russia has not proposed such an agreement, although Putin has recently spoken in general terms about the desirability of peace. Putin wants to get significant political concession from Ukraine to get it to agree to both the loss of territory and some kind of veto on his foreign policy. He also wants the sanctions against Russia to be lifted. Full fledged negotiations on a comprehensive peace settlement, which will be necessary to discuss these demands, may prove to be extremely lengthy and difficult. A ceasefire would give both sides time to regroup, but it would not bring a satisfactory or stable outcome to either side. It is possible that the fighting will reach a real stalemate when both sides will consolidate their positions and neither of them will feel strong enough to launch an offensive. In this case, the conflict will go into a state of alarming stagnation, but we're far from this situation. So far, we're dealing with the long lasting but unfinished hostilities, which in principle could last for many years. It is possible that conditions will change enough to trigger serious diplomatic activity. This could be a sudden shift in the balance of military power and gain an advantage on the battlefield, or a change in the broader political context. For example, after Trump's victory in the presidential election. Putin may believe that over time Russia will be more likely to benefit from such changes, but he cannot be sure of that, or that if they do occur, they will be in such a form that he can take full advantage of them. Since Ukraine is believed to be suffering from the consequences of the failed counteroffensive and lack of manpower and ammunition, several analysts suggest that Putin would still prefer to create these conditions sooner rather than later, and it's not giving up hope that it will work. This explains the extraordinary effort Russia has put into its recent offensive operations. These operations will only be effective if they convince Kiev that it has no choice but to accept the occupation of its territory and limitation of its future security policy. If this cannot be achieved, Putin will be in trouble. Even if its economy doesn't collapse into the abyss or Ukraine fails to make significant gains, equally, the continued failure to achieve an outcome that would look like a victory, that would achieve the minimum goals and have some chance of lasting if the guns fall silent, will pose a problem for Putin. While he may no longer fear complete defeat on the battlefield, he should be wary of a growing sense of meaninglessness and futility. Public support for the war in Russia is steady but also troubling, with a slim majority believing that war has done more harm than good, and while more than 70% of Russians support peace talks, far fewer support any concessions to Ukraine. The war would soon account for a third of all government spendings, a lot for what began as limited special military operation. The remilitarization of society, the propaganda budget is also growing in Russia, and the continued failure to reach a military solution in Ukraine will lead to even bigger questions. Ukraine's long range strike capabilities are growing, and while Ukraine might not be able to attack Russia to the same extent that Russia is attacking Ukraine, the scale of Ukrainian attacks could appear shameful to Russia and undermine confidence in Crimea's security. So, what does it mean for Ukraine's strategy? The stakes are much higher for Ukraine as its territory is occupied and it shows no signs of coming to terms with ultimate loss. So, while it's not easy for Putin to end the war, and I'm not at all optimistic that he will try to do so anytime soon. He will still have an easier time than Zelensky in the end. If Ukraine is not ready to cede its territory, it has nothing more to discuss with Russia. At the negotiations, which took place in March April 2022, the issue of neutrality was discussed. This discussion broke down because Ukraine still didn't want to remain defenseless and wanted some security guarantees. And the publicizing of the atrocities committed in the liberated areas around Kiev reinforced the urgent need to liberate the entire territory from Russian occupation. Russian proposals were vague on this issue. Thus, for Ukraine, there is currently no obvious way out of the war through negotiations, nor a direct path to military victory. With no prospects of a quick, acceptable end for Ukraine, this is a difficult period in the war. In this respect, it resembles Russia. It can also do enough not to lose, but not enough to win. The people are tired and resigned to the fact that this war can drag on for a long time. And Ukraine, as we know, cannot afford that because the Western aid started diminishing. Ukraine is increasing its own military production but still depends on foreign support. Ukraine wants foreigners to do more but fears they will do less, making it difficult to maintain even the current level of effort. In addition, Ukraine ends the year the same way it started, directing scarce resources to defend its territory against the Russian aggression. Hopes for their own effective didn't materialize. Breaking through well prepared Russian defenses has always been difficult, especially without aviation and with newly assembled units that have received only limited training and have no experience in conducting complex offensive operations. So it turned out, this is how it turned out. Ukraine rebuilt itself quite quickly and changes tactics, which allowed to reduce losses, but this means showing down the advance. If we use as a yardstick the indicator of liberated territories, which dominated the discussions last spring, the results turn out to be very disappointing. There have been other, more positive developments, which will be discussed below. But in 2023, it's coming to the end, and now it's time to decide what approach is the best to take in 2024. And we truly believe 2024 is going to be the most difficult year for Ukraine, while Ukraine is struggling to receive the funds from the European Union, mostly blocked by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and Republicans in the United States who oppose the aid of $61 billion that Ukraine desperately needs. Let's talk about what actually are soldiers talking at the front lines. We continue to lose ground to the enemy in almost everything: manpower, ammunition, drones. Almost 2 years of war didn't lead to 2 years of war didn't lead to a radical change in this regard. The Russians are learning from their mistakes and stealing our technological solutions. We are more creative, but they are able to scale our ideas and outnumber us. We won by being motivated, but after the unrealized plans to take this year Crimea also falls. It's clear people are not iron. They get tired. They need positive movements or gains. When Crimea is first drawn as a perspective, and then just holding a small village of Divka, which is very far from Crimea, is truly demotivating. But failure is not a reason not to put our hands down and simply give up. On the contrary, it's necessary to soberly analyze the situation and draw conclusions. We rely too much on our partners, not realizing our own potential. This is a huge mistake. But Its correction is our resource that we can use. Of course, tomorrow Ukraine will not build its own fighter jets. It will not construct analogs of HIMARS. We do not have and will not have a million jets to attack the enemy. But to produce drones many times more than the enemy and to use them better than him, it's real. We truly can do that. And as you know, the Ukrainian ammunition cluster, defense tech cluster, Ray 1, confirmed that this year Ukraine signed 63 large contracts of producing drones. Ukraine in the last year increased the production of drones by 1,000%. One of the main tasks of our society should be how to provide 100,000 drones per month. I say society, not the state. This is what the state must also ensure this process organizationally, and society itself must implement it. It's not enough just to believe in the armed forces, it's necessary to effectively help them. The more drones, the more lives saved by our military, the fewer new ones are mobilized. And most importantly, the advantage in drones will allow us to ensure that our birds loaded with explosive and flying into the enemy's stronghold every day. That the Russians refused to go into the position and were forced to conduct rotations every day, so that they simply had no one to hold the front line. Unfortunately, due to lack of funds and limited number of drones supplied to the divisions of our soldiers, so they have to buy and raise funds itself. But this is not only our problem, it applies to everyone. It's not the military who lose the war, but the countries. And our Western allies truly should understand that their help is crucial. We will not lose the war due to the fewer soldiers at the front lines, but we can lose the war because of lack of sufficient number of weapons. The whole country work should work on the priority task. If necessary, drone assembly rooms could be opened up in all the schools and universities. The whole nation have to use their hands to do that. This is also is a practical education, better than theoretical textbooks. The government should and begin its meetings precisely on these issues, the turning point of the war. But to begin with, this course must be approved in our own hands. The war should once again become a matter for the whole society, as it was in February and March 2022, and not only for the armed forces of Ukraine. Glory to Ukrainian soldiers. Glory to the soldiers fighting for our freedom. If you like my podcast, please share with your friends.